So you are a beginner drummer and you just got this drum set, it's got a bunch of pieces to it, and you just start to whip it together to the best of your ability. Then you are met with a bunch of problems and you start moving things around, only to find you got even more problems after that. So now you're looking at pictures of other drum sets and you're looking at some of your favorite drummers and seeing how they have their drum set set up, and then you try to copy it, but then you find it doesn't really work out for you and you're still having all those issues. In this video, we're going to deep dive into setting up the drum set the right way that's best for you from start to finish. From throne placement to cymbal height, we're going to get that drum set working for you rather than working against you. First step is to start with a blank canvas, so move all the drums out the way and let's just get your throne set up. First, you want to put the throne down and decide where you're going to be facing while you're sitting. Don't make the mistake of putting your bass drum down and letting it tell you where to sit. You really want to sit down first, and then we'll put the bass drum in later. Right now, we need to make sure that you're sitting where you want to and that your throne height is adjusted specifically for you. Now, if you're sitting too low, you're going to deal with some back pain. Your knees are going to be higher than your hips, so you're going to have very little range to lift those legs up. So you definitely do not want the throne to be sitting too low. You also don't want the throne to be sitting too high because it'll start to dig into the back of your legs and you're going to have some balance issues as well. Now, since you are a beginner, I would suggest you just go with the most common setup. That's having a 90-degree angle bend at your knee. So that way your legs are basically just making an L shape. You want your thighs pointed straight ahead of you and your calves just pointed straight down. You also want to have your body weight planted directly in the middle of the throne. And if you want to test this, you can lift up your legs while sitting on the throne. And if you start to lean forward or backwards, you know you're not in that sweet spot. Your main goal right now is to make sure you can have good posture, which means you have a straight back and you're upright and you're not struggling to do it. You don't want to be tense while having that straight back and good posture. It should just be natural while you sit down. So now that you're sitting comfortably in your throne, look down and see where your feet are sitting. Wherever they naturally fall is exactly where you want your pedals to be. So right now, go ahead and put your kick pedal down under your right foot and your hi-hat pedal under your left foot. If you are a double bass player and you have a double bass pedal, then put the slave pedal under your left foot right now and then add the hi-hat pedal to the left of it. Don't forget to make sure the legs of the hi-hat are not clashing into the pedal board of your slave pedal. Now that we got your pedals down, go ahead and grab the kick drum and lock it into the pedal. This is a good time to check the legs of your kick drum to make sure the front of the kick is lifted up off the ground. I like to have the resonant side a little bit higher than the batter side. This makes sure that the kick drum isn't rubbing up against the ground. It also closes the gap a little bit between the beater and the batter side head. When we set up our snare, we want it to just be flat. We don't want it to be tilted forward or back. Let's just get it flat for now. When it comes to the height of the snare, you want it just high enough where you can do rim shots easily. You don't want it too low because you're going to be slapping your leg with a drumstick or even worse, punching your leg. And if you have it too high, you won't be able to avoid the rim at all. So you want it just low enough to where you can get rim shots in very easily while also avoiding the rim if you need to. Now's a good time to adjust the hi-hat height. You basically just want to avoid your sticks clicking into each other. So when you're crossing over, you know, like your right hand is hitting the hi-hat, your left hand's hitting the snare, you don't want your sticks slapping against each other. As long as it's high enough to avoid that, you should be good. You also don't want them too high because you want your left hand to be able to get access to the top of the hi-hat as well. Now on my kit, I'm doing a simple 2-tom setup. I got one rack tom above me and I got a floor tom below me to the right. I want my rack tom right in front of me, directly behind the snare. My goal here is to be able to reach the tom over my snare without having to raise my shoulders or adjust my posture in order to reach it. I'm gonna have it just slightly higher than the snare and tilted towards me, just enough so I have good, easy access to the center of the drum head. And I also want to have access to rim shots when I want them. Now, some of you might have more than one tom up top. You might have 3, you might have 2. You just want to keep in mind that you don't want to be lifting up your shoulders in order to hit the center of the heads or to go over the rims or anything like that. You want easy access to all these toms without breaking your posture. Your goal setting up your drum set is really to just minimize reach. You want everything within arm's length where, again, you're just not breaking your posture and you're not overextending your arms to reach things. Now for the floor tom, we want it flat, pretty much the same height as your snare drum. Some people like to have it tilted towards them a little bit. I just like to keep it flat and matching the snare drum. Now the floor tom usually has 3 legs for it. Sometimes it's on a rack, but typically it's got 3 legs to it. Just make sure those legs aren't bumping into the kick pedal or the kick drum itself. You also want to make sure your knee or like your leg isn't rubbing up against the floor tom, but you want it as close as humanly possible without touching anything or getting in the way. So that way you have easy access from going to the snare to the floor tom. That's like how Ella Sapario Siberiano is able to whip back and and forth from the snare to his floor tom because they're very close together, and it's just a simple wrist motion getting from the snare to the floor tom. Alright, we're almost done. The last part is just to set up our cymbals. Now, besides the hi-hat, my setup has 2 crashes, a ride, and a china. A lot of beginners though will start with the hi-hat, 1 crash and 1 ride, so I'm gonna set up the crash and ride first. I want the crash to be right next to my hi-hat, just a little bit above it, but make sure it's out of the way of both the tom that's above my snare and the hi-hat itself. I don't want to be accidentally hitting it while doing simple beats or drum fills, so if it is in the way, just move it up a little bit higher, and if you do move your cymbals up higher, you want to move them closer to you as well, just to kind of close the gap. So again, you're just not reaching for them. Now for the ride cymbal, I want it between my 2 toms. I want it to be high enough to where I can crash the ride cymbal on the edge, and I also want to be able to have access to the bow and the bell. So once you have access to all those things, the crash, the bow, the bell, and you can easily reach the bell without extending your arm too much, take note to make sure it's not in the way of your toms. So like when you're doing a simple drum fill, you don't want to be accidentally hitting the ride cymbal. If that is the case, just raise the ride cymbal slightly. You don't want to raise it too much because you still want access to the top of it, like the bell and the bow. Just make sure it's out of the way of those toms. Now my setup, I have another crash cymbal. I want it to match the cymbal on the other side. I want it to be the same height pretty much, in the same distance. I want to be able to easily access it with my right arm. I also don't want it in the way of the ride cymbal, so if it is in the way, just move it up a little bit more. And again, like I said, if you move things up, move them closer towards you. Last but not least is the china cymbal. Just make sure it's not too low to block the floor tom, and it's out of the way of the crash, and you're good to go. And that's it, guys. Your drum set should be fully set up for you, and you should know what things to avoid now. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, I hope it helped you out, and I will see y'all on the next video.